In today's video, we're going to test out if it's possible to make a playable record out of candy. Guys, a while ago, I did a project that I thought was a ton of fun, seeing if you could pirate music by physically making a copy of a music record. To do that, we took some silicone rubber, poured it over the whole record, pulled the mold off, and then we cast resin onto it. The result we got wasn't the highest quality sound, but it did work. The mold and cast of the record was still playable on our record player. Since then, and currently, and suggested by dozens of people in between then and now, I've wanted to try this using candy. Instead of using resin, casting candy into the mold. We've had some difficulty casting candy into silicone molds before. It has a tendency to bubble quite a bit, and if there's a lot of bubbles, then you're not gonna get a good playable record. I do have a slightly different kind of silicone that I've done some small scale tests on, and it seems to work pretty well. I think doing that, along with avoiding adding any flavoring or coloring into the candy, should help minimize the amount of bubbles that we have in there. I'm gonna have to be pretty careful because even really small bubbles would probably throw the needle off massively, and then we would not get a nice smooth playback. But I do wanna try it. So I've got this, it's called Sorta Clear. It's just one of many types of silicone rubber made by Smooth On, and they recommend using this for candy casting. So I wanna try it and see if I can get a good result. First step is gonna be taking our record, mounting it to the desk a little bit, building a wall around it, and then we're gonna start mixing up our silicone and pour it over the record. Now we do need to make sure that our record is actually working before we mold and cast it, so we're just gonna give this a test. Last time we did this, we did have several people complaining about the quality of our record player. Yes, this is the cheapest one I could find. I'm not going for the high fidelity music experience. I'm literally just testing if it plays or not. All right, so our record does work, it does play. That's really all we need to know. So now let's try and make a mold of it. So I've got the record down on the table. I used a little bit of double-sided tape to hold it in place and make sure it doesn't like try and float up above the silicone. Now I'm gonna be using this oil-based clay as a barrier. I'm gonna put that all the way around the record, up against the edge so silicone can't seep underneath it, and then as sort of a wall as well, so that when we pour the silicone, it can just sort of fill onto it. Now I'm pretty sure what I have here is a sulfur-free oil-based clay. It's definitely oil-based. It's the kind that doesn't ever dry out, and that says that right on the packaging. Non-hardening, reusable, won't dry out. So that means it's an oil-based clay. All right, we're actually just gonna use our vacuum chamber as a mixing container because I do want to vacuum this stuff, but if it's like other silicones, it's going to expand a lot. And frankly, the best way to have all the space we need for it to expand is to just use the chamber itself. It's been pretty well washed and cleaned since we last used it, and it's gonna be a little bit awkward to mix it in the container, but not too bad. A lot of the time, the catalyst and the silicone are different colors, or even the two parts of the silicone are different colors. So you can easily tell when it's thoroughly mixed. Here we've got kind of clear and kind of clear. So slightly mixed and very thoroughly mixed look pretty much the same. So I may be over mixing because if it's too mixed, it will cure well. If it's not mixed enough, we're gonna have a lot of it not cure, or at least not cure quickly. And that's no good, but I think we're about there. So now we're gonna throw the lid on this thing, try and get rid of all these bubbles. I'm gonna let the pressure back in and then do it again. This time we'll let it sit at the full vacuum for like 5 or 10 minutes to really get out as much of the bubbles as we can. Now there's still bubbles in there, but I think we've pulled out about as many as we're gonna get just by using the vacuum chamber. This is a fairly thick silicone, so it doesn't like to fully degas. We're now going to try and pour it slowly onto the record, and then I'm going to go through and try and take out bubbles individually. So you can see that there are still bubbles in the silicone. Most of those I'm not concerned about. If it's not touching the surface of the record, that's fine. There can be bubbles in the middle of it. If there are any bubbles that are on the surface of the record that I'm concerned. And so that's why I've got this razor blade. Anywhere that I see bubbles, I don't know how well it's showing up on camera, but as I move this, the bubbles are actually casting sort of a shadow inside the silicone. If I have anywhere I can't see a shadow, that's a good sign that it's actually like touching the record down below. And I want to make sure to try and take those out. Overall, I'm pretty happy with this. This is looking quite good to me. And now we're just gonna let this cure overnight to make sure it's really solidly cured. I might hit it with a heat gun to try and pop some of the surface bubbles, just because that way, when we flip it over to cast into it, it will be flatter. We have now let the mold cure overnight. Good test for if the mold is cured is to just peel it off of whatever container you were mixing it in. This will also show me how well I mixed it up. If there are spots in here where it's like staying all gooey and goopy, that means I didn't do a good job of stirring it in those places. Oh yeah, that came off really nice. Whew. All right, so that should be good. Now we get to demold our record here. That is beautiful. I do not see a single bubble on the surface. Very exciting. All right, that is about as good of a mold as I could have hoped for. I am very happy with that. I'm just gonna do a quick trim around the edge to make it lay a little bit more flat. The surface tension where it was in contact with the clay will have given it a tiny bit of a lip in some places, and that will make it sort of dish down a little bit. And that really shouldn't ruin anything, but if I can eliminate that, it should be so much the better. Now we need to cook up a batch of hard candy. We're just gonna be using our normal recipe, which is 2 cups of white sugar, 2/3 of a cup corn syrup, and 3/4 of a cup water. Just cook that all together until it hits the hard crack stage on a thermometer. Then we're gonna let it cool down a fair amount so that all of the bubbles leave the candy. And I think it's at the higher temperatures that it really reacts with the silicone and gets more bubbles, and we don't want that. So we are gonna let it cool down a little bit, but it should still be runny enough to flow nicely into all of the grooves of the record. I've let the candy cool down after cooking, so there's really no bubbles in it anymore. I am gonna do a little bit of a test, just pouring a tiny bit of it onto the center of the mold where there's no track, no part of the record that will actually play. And I'm gonna see if it looks like it's bubbling up. And if it isn't bubbling up, then I'm just gonna keep spreading that, just try and get the candy to go all over the whole record. There are some bubbles in the candy, but it doesn't look like it's forming bubbles in contact with the silicone. So I'm just gonna see how well this works. That's what I was afraid of. There we go. I'm getting lots of bubbles on here now. All right, with our first attempt, we got a lot of bubbles, and I think it's because when the candy is thick, it stays very hot, and that heat is what's causing the bubbles. So I've got this cold stone slab, and I'm gonna try and cool it off using that, but also, I'm gonna try and have it at a sloped angle so that as I pour the candy on, it will run down more. And by doing that, I'm hoping it will stay thinner so there will be less heat in the candy, because as it's thin, it will cool off faster. Okay, this record has all sorts of bubbles and cracks in it, but I still wanna see if we can get any playing out of it, even just for a few seconds before the needle hits a bubble and freaks out. Apparently the grooves in this are too intense, and they're driving the needle sideways before it even gets a chance to play. All right, so I don't know if you can hear it through the static. There's like 95% static, but there is 5% music coming through the static. Theoretical proof of concept, we do have sound, we do have the music coming through a little bit. It's just figuring out how to actually get it to not bubble on the record so we get a clean cast of it. Well, I would not call this a resounding success. We did get a little bit of playable audio on this first one here. It's not great. So I would not say we've had a resounding success, but we did show a slight proof of concept. So I think this is something we're going to revisit in the future. There's gotta be some way to get perfect bubble-free castings of sugar on silicone. If you know anything about that, please let me know. The best results I've had are when the candy stays really thin and doesn't puddle up, but I have a very, very hard time getting that thin of a layer of candy to go down on the record. I think it has something to do with the heat. I'll have to experiment with that. I don't know if it would be better to heat the silicone up so it's closer to the candy temperature, or to cool it down so that maybe it causes the candy to solidify before it has time to form any bubbles. There's a lot of things that I can try. This is version 1. Hopefully we can revisit this in the future. Oily candy. Guys, that's it for today, but you know we've always got more for you to see. Click that box up at the top to check out our most recent video, and we'll see you in the next one. Talk to you then.